Hey, welcome back to Rust Order Garage and the $5,000 budget build 56 Chevy pickup. We are to the point of installing the modified eBay wiring harness, LS standalone wiring harness that I modified in one of the videos. It's a $79 LS1 to Vortec conversion harness. So time to put it on this thing and see if we can get it to start. All right, so before we install this harness, I will go over the layout of the harness, what all the connectors are for under the hood, and we'll go through the general install of the harness before we actually put it on. Now, remember, this harness is a JY Performance drive-by cable harness. It is not the same as, I call it the hybrid drive-by cable harness that I see for sale a lot on eBay. The hybrid harness is the one you'll know right away because it has connectors for both a 5-pin MAF and also a 3-pin MAF and 2-pin IAT. Both of them are on that harness. So that's why I call it a hybrid. It's kind of a mix. It's still pinned for the LS1, but they added extra connectors on it. The JY Performance was designed strictly LS1. It initially came with only the 3-pin MAF and 2-pin IAT, single wire alternator, yada yada. You know, you saw all that if you watched my $79 LS1 to Vortec harness conversion video. That's what this harness is. So let's go over all the connectors on it. So here is that modified JY Performance drive-by cable harness. To make this simple, I'm going to talk about it in 3 sections. I'll call it, 3 areas. We have the grommet, and on one side of that grommet, that's everything that's going to be inside the car. And then where it splits, we have, I'll call it left side or driver's side of the harness, and the right side or the passenger side of the harness. So starting in the back, the stuff that's going inside the car is going to be your relay and fuse center, your PCM. There's a ground wire that's going to attach to the dash. We have your ALDL connector and the underdash bundle, and we will go over every one of these wires when we do the install. As I've said before, don't install the PCM under the hood with one of these harnesses or this relay center. This stuff is not weatherproof. So if water gets on it or gets in it, it's going to get into the connectors and ruin your PCM. You can see that there's just open holes where there's no wires. It's not sealed. So first off, for that, do yourself a favor and keep that stuff inside the car somehow. Otherwise, you got to figure out a way to weatherproof it. But we'll go over all that stuff inside the car when we do the install. Let's start out here with the left and right sides of the harness and go over the connectors. All right, so let's start with the left side trunk. And it's much longer than the right side, so you'll know that's what we're dealing with. First thing on the left side, we have this extension harness here. Here's our connector for the 4L60. And we have the vehicle speed sensor connector for the 60. It's that. Then we have our cam sensor position plug on this side. This one here is going to be for knock sensors. We have a ground wire that's going to bolt to the back of the driver's side cylinder head. And we have our Bank 1 Sensor 1 O2 sensor connector. And as we went over in other videos, this is a black connector. This harness is wired for case grounded oxygen sensors. Bosch, I believe it's 13444. Works with these 2000 to 2002 Z28. Probably 99 to 02, but I always just buy them for 2000Z. And they work for this harness. Then we start getting to the injectors. Injector for this is going to be number 7, driver's side to back. Number 5, number 3, number 1, coil pack connector for the driver's side. And then we have our connectors here that go out to the front. This is going to go to the throttle body. That's going to be for the IAT. This one here is going to be for throttle position sensor. Getting to the end here, this is for coolant temperature sender. That's going to go in the driver's side front of the cylinder head. And then we have our alternator connector, and this is the one that I spliced on because initially this harness only had one wire, and I wanted the 2 wires. And I've gone over all that in the $79 LS1 to Vortec conversion video. That's all there is on the driver's side. Nope. And this one I forgot. I extended this. This was for the MAF sensor. I turned this into a 5-pin, and I just didn't put a connector on it yet because I didn't know where the MAF was going to be. So I just left the wires long. But again, I went over that on the $79 LS1 to Vortec conversion video. That's about it for driver's side bank. Let's go over to the passenger side. Moving to the right side trunk on the harness. This is going to be a lot fewer connectors than the left side. We have the bank 2 sensor 1 oxygen sensor connector here. We have this extended trunk here. Now this is going to go down to the starter. We have these 2 red wires. They were labeled fuse 1 and fuse 2. I lost my label for fuse 1, but we'll talk about those in a minute. And then also on this trunk, this is the connector for the crank position sensor. So that's that. Then we just have the section here that runs up by the injectors and coils. We have the injector connectors for number 8, number 6, number 2, and number 4. And we have the connector for the coils for the passenger side bank. And then this long extended one here, this is going to go to the map sensor. I think it's a little long because on the LS, the map sensor was in a different position than the truck, but it works fine. And that is pretty much it for under the hood. So I will go over connecting all of these to the engine. And obviously I'll be using injector adapters to go from the EV1 to Multec on this engine. So that won't be a problem. And once we figure out where the map sensor is going to be, or sorry, the MAF sensor is going to be, I'll put the connector on that. And then when we get inside the car, we'll go over all of this in here. But let's talk about these guys for a minute. All right, let's talk about these 2 guys. Now, these 2 wires are the power feed into the harness from the car. Now, these are labeled fuse 1 and fuse 2. I am assuming, which may not be a good thing, that there are fusible links on these wires. The reason you want fusible links on these wires is to protect them. Whereas everything downstream of your fuses is protected from the fuse. If you get a short downstream of that fuse, it'll pop the fuse and shut the power off. There is no protection for these. This is direct power from your battery into the harness. If you pinch these, crunch these, they burn through on an exhaust system, rub through and short, they will burn and basically can start a fire. That's why you would want a fusible link on these, which will burn and protect the car from burning down. Now, again, I'm assuming you do what you got to do. I'm assuming there's fusible links on these wires, and that's why they're labeled fuse 1 and 2, but I have no proof. And I'm not going to short them out and test it. What I am going to do is, as I always do, run these wires protected and away from anything that could possibly happen to pinch them, burn through them, or whatever. Keep them away from exhaust. Keep them away from anything that could hurt these wires. Now, if you don't trust these and you want to add your own fusible links, it's very easy to do. All you do is buy a couple of these. These are Dorman, part number 85620, and it's basically just a fusible link. It even has the crimp connector on it. All you would do is cut this eyelet off, crimp this on, and now these wires are protected against burning up if they get crunched, pinched, or whatever. That is up to you how you do it. That said, let's install this harness. All right, so in preparation, putting the harness in, obviously I was working on the truck and put pretty much, I'd say, most of the body wiring is now done on this truck, other than the front lamp harness. And I did some preliminary wiring, and I'm going to have some wires here that I know I'm going to tie into the eBay harness ahead of time. I had them pretty much set to go. So we're going to go over all of those wires, but first we're going to deal with putting the harness in the truck and see if it'll start, because I don't need any of the under dash stuff other than the fuel pump. to get this thing to fire up. I did drill a 2-inch hole in my firewall, hoping that'll work out okay. It was in a tough spot. And you know, the 2-inch hole saw never really makes a 2-inch hole. It could be 2 1/8, I don't know, we're gonna find out. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay the harness in here and feed it all in from this side out to the engine compartment. So PCM connectors, everything is gonna stay in here, and I'll feed all the engine side connectors out the firewall. All right, I've got most of my up top wiring plugged in. Unfortunately, this is just impossible to video because most of this stuff is just out of the way. You can't see it. But the 2-inch hole in the firewall did work. Grommets in, harness is dropped through the back. My O2 sensors are not plugged in yet. I'll go over that. Transmission's not plugged in. Starter's not connected. None of that stuff underneath is done yet. All I've done is routed the wiring, and I went under the rails, which is kind of a pain in the butt. You may or may not want to do that, but there's enough wire to do it. I still have to put all the injector adapters on. There's it right there. They came with the harness, and that'll get the injectors done. Map sensors plugged in here. Cam sensors plugged in the back down there where you can't see it, under there somewhere. Coil packs are plugged in on both sides. Throttle position sensor and IAC are plugged in. Alternator, what else? Coolant temperature sensor. Is that it? Map sensor, cam sensor, coils, injectors. There's really not a whole lot else. That's it. So I'm going to put the injector adapters on, plug in the injectors, and then we will move underneath. And when you get these injector adapters, they have locks on them. See the little blue plastic there? We're going to see if I can show that. We're going to pop that up so the lock is up in the air, and now it'll snap on, and then you just push that back down, lock it in. All right, under the truck, everything is tied in. Here's my driver's side O2 sensor plug up in there. The transmission wiring actually comes over the top of the transmission. There's a connector for the transmission there, and there's a VSS connector there. There's my 2 red wires going to my starter lug. Crank sensor is plugged in behind that, so you can't really see it. Passenger side O2 sensors plugged in up there. And then what was left? I think the only other thing I had here was ground for the bolt for the to the engine off the harness, which is, where is it? It's up there, right to the back of the cylinder head. So that's the ground wire off the harness to the engine. And I think that was about it for the harness underneath. It's really pretty simple. The other thing I had to do here was ground wires. Grounding is very important. So I've got a heavy ground going from the engine block to the frame, and I've got a ground back here from the cab to the frame. So everything is all tied together, and that'll keep things working as they should. Grounds are important, so make sure you got them. All right, moving along here, trying to get closer to the first start. One other thing I forgot to mention, knock sensors. For some reason on this harness, it seems that the connector for the knock sensor is not long enough, the wire, to reach the connector in the factory location. So I unclip it from the intake, move it back here, and zip tie it so it doesn't move for the knock sensors. I think that was the only connector I forgot to talk about here. I extended my wires, as you saw in the one video, and just now before the first start, I soldered in a factory 5-pin MAF connector. I snagged this Zoomy Spectre cold air intake system at the junkyard, believe it or not. It was on a Tahoe. Grabbed that for 20 bucks. So that's on there, even with the MAF sensor and everything. Hopefully it's good. Don't know what that means. Probably a direction of airflow. Somebody marked it or something. So everything up here is buttoned up. I've got a battery temporarily hooked up with a couple temporary cables because the battery's not going to be up front here permanently. It's going in the back. And I just have the ground wire to the exhaust stud there, and obviously the battery cable down to the starter. So hopefully that's a good enough connection to get things going. So after all of that, let's move inside the cab. All right, it is time to do in the cab wiring. I am going to try to simplify this to make it easy as I possibly can. So to start, I'll go over what we have here inside the cab, and then we'll go through things one at a time. So looking at the inside section of the harness here, I have the ALDL port. This obviously is for plugging in to talk to the computer, for doing tuning or whatever you want to do, scanning for codes. We don't need to do anything for this to start the engine, anything with this to start the engine. This is the underdash bundle of wires. Now, same thing. I will go over what all these wires are, but none of them are needed to start the engine. So I'm going to ignore them for the moment. I'm going to cut the bare wire back so nothing can short against anything, but these are not going to be needed to start the engine. And right now I just want to first do a test start, and then we'll come back to this stuff because I don't know if it runs. We have a ground wire. This will need to be connected to ground somewhere. This is an old truck. Everything in here is metal. For permanent installation, this can be bolted somewhere under here. I'll probably bolt it right to the dash. But for now, I'll probably put a jumper wire on it just to make sure things are working okay. These are obviously our connectors for the PCM. Self-explanatory. I need to install the PCM. PCM has to have, at a minimum, VATs turned off. I have a bunch of trouble codes turned off as well that I know I don't need, like secondary O2s and EGR, that kind of stuff. But there may be more that I'll have to go in and turn off once the engine starts up. So let's get into what we need to have to start the engine. All right, so to start the engine, there's going to be 3 wires, and we'll go over them all one at a time. There's going to be 2 wires for the fuel pump, and a wire to connect to this, which is a trigger for the ignition relay. As far as the fuel pump goes, those 2 wires are a positive lead, full-time power, fused or with a fusible link, and that's my red wire right here. This is going right down to my starter lug and has a fusible link. This is actually tied into the factory harness. I have a 1987 Monte Carlo Super Sport harness in this truck that I pared down to use. This is a factory wire off that harness, 12 volt full-time. The second wire is this blue wire here. This runs all the way back to the positive lead of the fuel pump. And both these wires are 10 gauge. 10 gauge is a little heavy probably for the pump I'm using, but it takes care of voltage loss, and if I want to go something bigger, that's good. So those are the first 2 wires you need to make this thing run. 12 volt power and a line back to the fuse pump. And that third wire is going to connect to the ignition relay here off the eBay harness, and that has to be 12 volts with key on and cranking. And that wire for me is this orange wire right here, and I have that tied into an ignition wire, and I will show you how to test to make sure you have 12 volts key on and cranking, because that's something that trips people up. If they only have 12 volts with the keys on and then it goes away when you crank, it's not going to work. So let me show you how to test that wire. All right, so to test your wire that you're going to need for your key on and cranking, get yourself a digital voltmeter. Doesn't matter if it's a $5 Harbor Freight meter or a Fluke or whatever. Learn how to use a DVM. They're great tools. Lots of help for troubleshooting. So put your meter on DC volts, which is a straight line and a dotted line underneath it. Now this is an auto arranging meter, so I don't only have one selection. But if you have like a Harbor Freight one, put it on probably the 20 volt selection, because we're only going to be looking for 12 volts. And we'll put the meter here. Now because I have my battery grounded to the engine, which is grounded to the frame, which is grounded to the cab. This cab is a good ground. I'm going to take my negative side of my meter. I'm just going to attach it to metal right on my dash there. And then the other side, I'm going to want to touch to this wire here. And I'll just use a jumper lead just to make it easier so I don't have to hold it. So I have a couple alligator clips. And right now my key is off, so there should be no power here. And there is no power here. Now what I'll do is make sure my leads are not touching anything metal here. This stuff out of the way. All right, and now I'm going to turn the key on. There you go. I have a bright light in here to get light in here. Key on. There you see I have 11.49 volts. And then I'm going to turn the key to start position. Now, I have I have a neutral safety switch on this truck, so I'm going to take it out of park. So when I turn the key to start, the engine's not going to turn over. I should still see the same voltage, and there it is. I still have the same voltage. I have the key in start position right now, and I let go, and it's still there, and that's off. If you turn the key to start position and you lose your voltage, it's no good. You need a wire that has 12 volts, key on and cranking. Most of the time, if you had a car with an HEI ignition, you can use the wire that would have powered the coil. But on an older GM vehicle that might have used a resistor wire, you would only have 9 volts. And that you don't want to have. So that's why I say use a digital multimeter and not just a test light, because you actually want to read the voltage. If the car is newer than 1975, like 75 or newer, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have not a resistance wire in there, but there may have been cars that still used a ballast resistor or something, so you just want to verify your voltage. 12 volts, key on, and cranking. All right, so just as a temporary hookup, I've got my tested wire hooked up to that red ignition wire trigger. That goes to the ignition relay on the eBay harness. And then the other 2 wires are here for the fuel pump, the 12 volt feed to the fuel pump relay, and then the wire going out to the positive side of the fuel pump. Now these wires, you are going to need to install connectors on the end of them. And I have one loose here somewhere, do I? Yes, right here. These are female spade connectors with a locking tab. They are 6.3 millimeters, okay? And they are crimp-on style connectors. And you're going to need to install those. And you're going to want a set of crimping pliers, something like this, to install them. It makes it very easy rather than trying to use a vice grip or something. These things work fantastic and they're not expensive. Now the reason you have to put those on there is because these eBay harnesses come missing 2 wires on the fuel pump relay. And the fuel pump relay is the one with the green wire. Now I've talked about relays before, basically just being a high current switch. And I'm going to try to keep this simple just because if you want to go over everything in a relay, we can, but this is why you need those wires. Basically, the relay is just a set of points that closes and will send power to an output. It's basically a high current switch, like I said. Now, the fuel pump relay is being triggered by the PCM. So the coil, the 2 wires for the coil are that green wire here. This is going to be 12 volts out of the PCM. And then below it is a black wire as ground. So when 12 volts is sent by the PCM on that green wire, the set of points will close, and it is going to send power from this non-existent port to this non-existent port over there, or I should say non-existent wires. Those are the 2 places where you need to install those wires, and you need those special ends on the wires in order for them to snap into place and work with the relay. Make sure you get the 6.3 millimeter connectors with the locking tab. They sell them without it, but without it, they won't stay seated in the connector and then they'll fall right out. And if you look at the diagram that's printed on the relay, there, the missing wires are going to be on pin 30 and 87. All right. And looking at the bottom of the relay, this wire here is 30 and the one across from it is 87. So if you look at the ports here on this guy, the top center wire is going to be pin 30 and the bottom would be 87. So I'm going to put the red 12-volt feed on pin 30 and that blue wire running back to the fuel pump in 87. And you can see how they have a little notch. They have a hole and the slot for the tab, but then there's that little, almost like top little notch there. That's where the locking tab locks into. And you have to slide them in from the back. And I don't know if I can get this on video because I have to get under here because my wires are not long enough to bring them over here. But I'm going to, like I said, slide the 12-volt feed, battery feed on pin 30. And then to the fuel pump, will be on 87. Let me get those snapped in there. All right, so they're looking at the wiring on the back of the fuel pump relay. You can see I have my red wire on the right side, the blue wire on the left. Right side's 30, left side is 87. The green wire on top, that should be 85. That's already pre-wired, and the bottom ground should be 86. Again, pre-wired. Just the red and the blue I had to install. So those are snapped in, locked in. Fuel pump relay is in. Let's move to the next point. And these 6.3 millimeter terminal ends, they are available on Amazon or wherever else. I don't know if this part number will show up anywhere, but that's what I ordered. Hopefully you can see that. It's so bright with that one light I can't tell if it's showing, but I ordered 100 of them for a few bucks and they'll last me quite a while. All right, so with the fuel pump relay now connected, next thing is going to be installed PCM, which is just connected the right way. If I can get these things lined up here. And we're going to see together if it starts. PCM, I turned off VATs, and I turned off my usual grouping of DTCs that I'm not going to need. Things like secondary O2s and EGR and stuff like that. That stuff's all turned off. And my battery, we'll see if it's strong enough to, hopefully, to fire it. You saw the voltage reading was under 12 volts, so I think my battery's a little weak. But we'll see how it goes here. All right. So, one last thing. Forgot to connect this ground. I'll use a jumper lead. Hopefully I get a good enough connection here. Let's see. Test that ground. Connect that to the body. Yep, we're good. All right, so we have ground. We have fuel pump relay hooked up. We have the ignition relay hooked up. And we have a PCM. All right, I guess it's time to see what happens. All right, first test. I'm just going to turn the key on, make sure this fuel pump turns on. Should cycle for a few seconds. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, I heard it. All right, that's working. So our fuel pump relay is working, and the fuel pump signal is working. All right, now let's put you up front. We'll see if it starts. All right, here goes nothing. I think we're ready to go. If it starts, this will be the first time I've started it since, you know, took it out of the donor truck. So that's probably, you know, a few months ago, 4 or 5 months ago maybe. Well, hopefully the battery's strong enough. Let's turn it over and see what happens. Let's see. Get the cab here. All right, we're in park. Here goes nothing. Like I said, here goes nothing. Let me tighten up the battery cables. All right. First start, take 2. All right, let's see again. These early LSs have a lot of piston slap when they're cold. Almost sounds like a diesel. Gonna need to top off the power steering. Let me top off the power steering and then we'll see if it's charging. All right, first start with the modified harness is a success. Next thing I'm very curious about is the charging voltage. If you watched my Vortec or LS1 to Vortec modification video, you know on this harness I added the second wire, reference wire off the alternator back to the PCM. I'm hoping to see at least 14 volts on this thing. Probably, maybe even 15 if the Silverado gauges are right, what I usually see. But I want to see at least 14 volts, not 13.2. If I see 13.2, then that modification didn't do anything. If I'm over 14, that's good, because the 55 Buick with this harness that I didn't add the second wire really doesn't seem to charge over 13 volts. I've never had a problem with it starting or anything like that, but I'd like to see more voltage out of it. So I'm going to hit the key again. And let's see what we get for a charging voltage. $14.3. That's awesome. That means it's working. And his cheesy mufflers even don't sound half bad. Like it has a cam. It doesn't. He just has to learn. IAC's got to learn. Just has to run for a while and that stuff will smooth right out. nice. All right, well, we know it runs. So let's go over the final wiring on this harness, which is the underdash bundle. All right, so as you just saw, this underdash bundle is not needed to start the engine. So you can test fire everything and make sure all good and then come back to this. Now, this wiring harness, this is the JY Performance harness, the drive-by cable. It is part number, I will tell you when I get the box over here. Now, listen, we know that this, there's the part number, DAC623. We all know that this manual is a copy of somebody else's manual, okay? It's well known that they copied this from somebody. So the wire, you know, they list in here what the wires are for the underdash bundle, but the colors may not 100% match. So just take that as you know, a grain of salt when you read all this stuff. You might read something and say, that doesn't make sense. Well, that's because it really was not made for this harness, but they took it anyway. But let's go over what we have under here. We have, let's start off, this brown wire. This is a service engine soon light, MIL light, whatever you want to say, control. This is from the PCM, and the PCM sends a ground, okay? I have a LED, or a light rather, that I put in the dash. That's going to be my service engine soon light. I have one side of it already hooked up to key on 12 volts. The ground side is going to connect to this, and I ran a wire over here in my own little bundle from my wires that's going to go to it. So that'll be for the service engine soon light. The black wire, this is for the speedometer. I am going to run an electric speedometer. This will be my signal going into the electric speedometer. The white wire is going to be for the tachometer. And we went over that in the LS1 to Vortec conversion video, where I showed how to repair this wire, because this used to be hooked up to 12 volts at the ALDL port. And then I also added a 10K resistor on this thing, so I'm hoping whatever tach I connect will work no matter what. Then we have a dark green and a dark blue. These are for fan 1, dark green, and fan 2, dark blue. If you're going to run electric fans, these are going to be the triggers for your fan relays. These will be grounds. So on the pin 85 and 86 of the relays, 85 will go to 12 volts. These would go to 86 on each relay, okay? So that would be for fan 1, fan 2. I'm still not sure if I'm running a mechanical fan on this or electric. I will get into wiring an electric fan if I have to do it. Otherwise, check back. I ran electric fans on both my Buick and the 51 Hudson, so I go over it on them. The purple wire, this is for TCC lockup. So you're going to want to connect this if you're running an automatic with lockup converter. Now, this will go to your stoplight switch. This has to have 12 volts when the brakes are off. When you step on the brakes, the 12 volt goes away. That's where this goes to, okay? This actually, I have a wire running over to my stoplight switch, and I ran it all the way over here already for it, and I used a purple wire because I know I'm going to connect to a purple wire. Okay, that's for TCC lockup. Then you have an orange wire. This is a park or neutral input signal. Now, the 4L60E doesn't have to use the range sensor on the side of the transmission. It has the internal manifold switch. So the PCM still knows what gear you're in, even if you're not using that range sensor, and I'm not using it. This does not need to be connected. As you saw, the truck starts and runs fine. All I believe this does is if you're in park or neutral, I think it bumps the idle up a little bit. Last wire is going to be this pink wire. It's not going to be used. Now, it isn't even listed in the book. In the book, they list a gray and a tan wire, which used to be, or were supposed to be, for F-body gauge cluster. And in the book, it says 98 to 02, but it's really only 98, because 99 to 02, they use serial data for the cluster. So you can ignore this pink wire. The other wire, and now I can't remember what color it was, it used to be 2 extra wires, and one of them actually ran up into the alternator plug. And I used that to add my second wire to the alternator. So basically, for me, what am I going to use? Well, I'm going to hook up my tach. I'm going to hook up my service engine soon light. I'm going to hook up my speedometer. That's about, and I'm going to hook up my TCC lockup. That is what I'm going to use. I'm not going to use either fan signal right now, not yet. I'm not going to hook up the park neutral switch wire. I don't need that, and I'm not going to hook the extra. So all I have are these left, these 4 wires, and they will be very simple to tie in to my harness. And we'll be done with this thing. So out of this underdash bundle, the only wire I can connect right now, just to show you anything, is I connect the brown wire, the service engine soon wire, to this guy. It runs to the ground side of my service engine soon light, which is that guy there. So now I can test it. You just turn the key on, and I know it's working. So that's my service engine soon light. If I got any codes, that'll be lit. So far, so good. No codes. So we'll keep an eye on that once it starts driving and learning. The rest of the stuff I have to hook up. I'm going to tie everything up and make the connections. The lockup wire, you know, the purple wire, if you're actually using a Silverado brake light switch like I am, it already has a purple wire, and that is the correct wire to use. It's back in there to connect. Otherwise, I made a video on connecting the TCC lockup to the early style switches, so that's on my channel as well if you want to take a look at that. So that'll be it for this one. It's getting chilly out. It's late. It's dark out. It's getting cold. Hey, that's fantastic. So the first start was a success, but not a surprise because we went over the harness completely, and you know, if the harness is good, it should fire right up. Everything was all set right. So I'll end this one here. I wanted to keep this video pretty focused on just the wiring, that wiring harness, if somebody just wants that information. When we come back on the build video series, I'll get more into some things I have done since the last video in that series, which was the fuel system. I've done a lot of other little things here and there, getting it ready for this first start. So we come back, if you want to follow along this video series here, this is a $5,000 budget for this complete build. I'll go over the rest of the things that I did since then and what the next steps are be. So I hope that was helpful. As you can see, these eBay harnesses do work. Spend a little time going over them, make sure everything's good. If you have one of these JY Performance harnesses like this, follow my repair video, the LS1 to Vortec conversion video, and it goes over the things I did to this harness. And as you can see, it worked just fine. No issues whatsoever. So, again, hope it was helpful. Thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you for watching. Oh, I wanted to see, I'm still keeping track of the votes as far as the next build. That Rambler wagon's looking pretty good. See you soon.
It's alive!